Hey pups, Badwolf here, and I hope you have enjoyed this little series on stories with my son so far. The first video got a lot of really nice feedback, really good stuff. Thank you very much for all your kind comments on that. I really do appreciate that. Tonight I have another video like that. This will be episode 2 in this series, and we're going to read you 2 stories tonight. So I hope you pups enjoy. Get a cup of hot chocolate or whatever. Get tucked in and enjoy these few stories with my son. And thank you very much for watching. Have a good night. Bye-bye. The Fairy Fluffykins. The Fairy Fluffykins lived in a warm, woolly nest in a hole down an old oak tree. She was the sweetest, funniest little fairy you ever saw. She wore a little soft dress and on her head a little woolly cap. Fairy Fluffykins had red hair and the brightest, naughtiest brown eyes imaginable. What a life she led the animals. Fairy Fluffykins was a sad tease. She would creep into the nests where the fat baby dormice were asleep in bed, while Mama Dormouse nodded over her knitting and Papa smoked his little pipe, and she would tickle the babies until they screamed with laughter. One night she had fine fun. She found a little dead mouse in a field, and an idea struck her. She hunted about till she found a piece of long grass, and then she took the little mouse, tied the piece of grass around its tail, and ran away with it to the big tree where the ancient owl lived. There was a little hole at the bottom of the tree, and into it Fairy Fluffykins crept, leaving the mouse outside in the moonlight. Presently she heard a gruff voice in the tree saying, "I smell mouse. I smell mouse." Then there was a swoop of wings, and Fairy Fluffykins promptly drew the mouse into the little hole and stuffed its tail into her mouth so that she might not be heard laughing. And the gruff voice said angrily, "Where's that mouse gone?" She grew tired of this game after a few times, so she left the mouse in the hole and crept away to a new one. She really was a naughty fairy. Next she took to tormenting the squirrels. She used to find their stores of nuts and carry them away and fill the holes with pebbles. And this, when you are a hard-working squirrel with a huge family to support, is very trying to the temper. Then she would tie acorns to their tails, and she would clap her hands to frighten them, and pull the baby squirrel's ears till at least they offered a reward to anyone who could catch Fairy Fluffykins and bring her to be punished. No one caught Fairy Fluffykins, but she caught herself, as you shall hear. She was poking about round a haystack one night, trying to find something naughty to do, when she came upon a sweet little house with pretty wire walls and a wooden door standing open. In hopped Fluffykins, thinking she was going to have some new kind of fun. There was a little white thing dangling from the roof, and she laid hold of it. Immediately there was a bang. The wooden door slammed and Fluffykins was caught. How she cried and stamped and pushed at the door, and promised to be a good fairy and a great many other things, but to no purpose. The door was tight shut, and Fluffykins was not like some fortunate fairies who can get out of anywhere. There she remained, and in the morning one of the laborers found her. And thinking she was some kind of dormouse, he carried her home to his little girl, and if you call on Mary Ann Smith, you will see Fairy Fluffykins there, still in a little cage. There is no one to tease and no mischief to get into. So if there is a miserable little fairy anywhere, it is Fairy Fluffykins. And I'm not sure it doesn't serve her quite right. The end. Did you like that one? Yeah. The Precious Stove. Peter lived with his mother, father, brothers, and sisters in an old wooden cottage deep in the woods of Austria. They were very poor, and the cottage had hardly any furniture, and they might have been very cold in the winter were it not for their most treasured possession, a stove. This was no ordinary stove. It was made of white porcelain, and it was so tall, the gold crown at the top almost scraped the ceiling. Its feet were carved like lion's claws, the talons painted gold. The sides of the stove were painted with flowers and rare birds in glowing colors, and the door was tiled in blue and gold. It looked very out of place in the poor wooden cottage, for it had originally been made for a king's palace, many years before Peter's grandfather had rescued it, after a great war, from the ruins of the palace where he used to work. Peter used to draw copies of the flowers and birds on pieces of brown paper with a stub of old pencil. One evening, as Peter and his sister Gilda lay curled up in the warmth at the foot of the stove, their father came in shaking the snow from his boots. He looked tired and ill. "My children, tomorrow the stove will be taken away,
as I have had to sell it. We have no money, and we need food more than we need a stove." The children were horrified, but their father would not change his mind. That night, instead of banking up the stove to keep it burning warmly through the night, he let the fire die down so it was quite cold in the morning. The traders arrived and loaded the stove into a cart. Peter's mother and father looked at the handful of gold coins the traders had given them and shook their heads. Peter and Gilda whispered together outside behind the woodpile. "You have to follow the cart, Peter," said Gilda, "so you can see where our stove goes." So Peter rushed off down the track after the cart, pausing only to grab a couple of apples. The journey into town was slow, but by evening it had reached the station. Peter crept as close as he dared and heard the traders arranging for the stove to go to Vienna by train the very next morning. Once the traders had gone to an inn for the night, he clambered inside the stove. He soon fell fast asleep. When he awoke, the train was moving fast. Peter munched his apples and wondered what his parents would be thinking. Just where was he going to end up, and what could he do to keep the stove for his family? Eventually, the train came to a halt, and with much banging and clattering, all the boxes around the stove were unloaded onto the platform. Then Peter heard a gruff voice. "That valuable stove is going to the palace. Take care it isn't damaged in any way." The palace! Peter sat as quiet as a mouse as he felt the stove lifted onto another cart. It clattered through the cobbled streets, and then came to a halt. "Truly, it is a very beautiful stove. I did not expect it to be so fine," said a deep, important voice. And then the handle of the door turned, and light flooded into the stove. Peter tumbled out onto the floor before looking up at a man dressed in a bright red jacket, with great gold tassels and gold buttons. Glittering medals gleamed on his chest, and a great silver sword hung by his side. It was the king! Peter was absolutely terrified, but he kept on smiling. "Well, my boy, how did you come to be inside my new stove?" A servant rushed forwards and grabbed Peter by the arm, meaning to drag him away, but the king raised his hand and the man stepped back. "Let the child speak," said the king. Well, once Peter found his tongue, he could not stop. He told the king all about the stove. The king listened in silence while Peter told his story. "Peter, I'm not going to give you back your stove, for it belongs here at the palace. But I will give your father several bags of gold, for it is a very valuable stove. And perhaps you would like to stay here and look after it for me," he asked. Peter was delighted, and he looked after the stove for the king from that day on. His family never wanted for food again, and every summer they would all come to stay at the palace to see Peter and the stove, of course. The end. That was a weird one. All right, buddy. I'll let you go to sleep then.
Okay.
I love you.